Of the entire fall 2022 anime lineup, the one title that I was the most intrigued by, but very cautious of, was Raven of the Inner Palace. It's a series that has all the makings of a really classic period piece mystery fantasy drama that really does have my interest. And after watching the first episode of the series, I am already pretty sold on what we have here. Clever interweaving of storytelling that is covering a lot of content in a very clever way, all packaged in a very beautiful art style. But this is my impressions of the first episode of Raven of the Inner Palace, a series that is streaming on Crunchyroll, so let's jump right into it. Where do we start with the story? There's a lot to cover here in just this first episode, and like I said, it's not complete information dump. It really is well interwoven with the actual mystery of what they're setting up between the current emperor and this Raven Consort. But what you get from the very beginning is that this guy comes into the Inner Palace, and it seems like he killed the current empress of this entire kingdom. What we find out later is that he actually imprisoned her. Now, this is an actual prince who's kind of been put to the wayside after his mother was murdered. And the current empress essentially ascended the throne and took over everything. And so after gaining allies, he pretty much came back in and took over the throne from this empress. But he doesn't want to execute her quite yet. He believes that this empress killed his mother, but he wants to get evidence. He doesn't want to do, if she did kill his mother, he doesn't want to be the same as her. He wants to find evidence first in order to prove her guilt. We'll jump forward and we have the meeting between this emperor and this Raven Consort. Yes, this palace is full of consorts, tons of them, but the Raven Consort's different in the idea they're always secluded away from the emperor, and they're known to have mysterious abilities. And the emperor comes to the consort in order to ask her a request. He has an earring, and he's trying to find the owner of this earring. Well, after her basically telling him, no, I'm not going to help you, every request that is given to me has an equal value that has to be restored. Pretty much the concept of if you want somebody cursed to death, you have to dig 2 graves. That kind of concept is what she presents to him. Well, after giving up and leaving, after she uses some magic to push them out, he comes back. But this time, he comes with some meat buns, something that is like her favorite. And so she's kind of forced to have to accept whatever request he has because she doesn't want to be indebted to him and she really likes these buns. But again, she says this earring that he has can't tell her where the owner is. It doesn't have enough key in it. But he changed the request. He says, look, I think it belongs to a ghost, or it's possessed with a ghost. And after she does a little spell on the thing, it ends up revealing this person who's being strangled, which she quickly dispels. This is the ghost of the owner of it, which they're assuming at this point was somebody that was either strangled or hanged themselves. But the emperor doesn't want to stop there. He's like, I really need to find out who this person is and what happened to them. And so, reluctantly, this Raven Consort decides to accept his offer and look into it. And what you kind of have following this is you have this Raven Consort, Jisutsu. She goes around the inner palace areas and kind of questions a couple people to find out the story behind this earring. And through all these conversations, she ends up finding out this earring belonged to one of the consorts of this palace. And there was 3 total consorts that was murdered during the process of the empress taking over. One was executed for adultery, one was poisoned, and then one was actually accused of the poisoning of the second and hung herself. And you gotta get an idea through this gossip that's happening between these consorts that this is kind of a normal thing. Whenever somebody actually does a murder in the palace, it's typically blamed on the lady in waiting. So it's kind of assuming at this point, this consort that hung themselves did it because they were wrongfully framed. An additional thing that Jusetsu finds out during this entire thing was this rumor about the grandfather of the current emperor. He was a man that was afraid of ghosts as well. He used to light the entire area at night in the inner palace because he was afraid of the ghosts of the previous dynasty, the entire dynasty that he wiped off the face of the earth, slaughtered every single one of them, women, children, all of them. And whenever he did see these ghosts, they had beautiful silver hair, which is a signature of the previous dynasty, which is something we note for later. Towards the later part, we find out from the emperor that yes, he's trying to find actual proof against this empress before he executes her, and additionally that he's looking for the fortunes that the empress had stowed away. But following this scene, he's kind of wandering around inside the inner areas, and he eventually comes across Jusetsu, who is washing her hair in a pond. And yes, like I said earlier, her hair is all silver, which technically signifies that Jusetsu, this current Raven Consort, is somebody of the previous dynasty. Now, what's that going to matter? That's the big question mark, because the grandfather's dead. This new emperor, I don't know if he has any ties to the previous dynasty or if he's affected by that at all. But it does imply that Jusetsu is of a previous dynasty that was all wiped out by his grandfather. So it will technically put into play questions of her loyalty. So yes, my thoughts on this so far is I am really intrigued. I think the way that they're laying out everything so far has been fantastic. Now, yes, the very beginning, there was a huge information dump. It was basically talking about this the moon coming down into the sea. It created two gods that created two different types of areas. Then eventually it birthed this other god that was the dock to one of these secluded islands. And then that one sinned and was shredded into 8 pieces, and it went down the river until it reformed together, which created the turtle god that protects the seas and the ships. And then the descendants of these gods would eventually be the Emperor's bloodline. So it was just basically an idea to give you a sense that this bloodline of the Emperor is seen as being blood of the gods, and that's why the Emperors are so looked forward to. It wasn't that important. That's typically the idea of a lot of these bloodlines. But no, like the aspect of telling the current story and about the grandfather and about the previous dynasty and all this other stuff surrounding it was all done cleverly through this request that this Emperor has to this Raven Consort, getting an idea of where this earring came from, which sort of tells a story about what is happening and what the Empress did and what happened to the consorts before her. So it already gives me an indication that while there is going to be a lot of information to go through here, which I think most of it's pretty much gone through, I don't think there's going to be too much heavy dialogue going forward that's going to be in that depth, but at least it shows me they're going to be cleverly telling the story through the gossip that's happening between the consorts and what Jusetsu is currently looking into. And yes, I was kind of surprised to find out at the very end that this little dialogue about ghosts and silver hair would come into play with Jusetsu herself. It was kind of having a nice little twist at the end of a first episode is typically not something I expect. And yes, like I said earlier, very beautifully portrayed. I think, oh my gosh, Jusetsu looks absolutely gorgeous. Like the amount of effort Bandai Namco Pictures is putting into her design and the strands of hair and her style. And again, very much so in this time period, very beautiful looking, very dressed consort. I think it's doing an incredible job of portraying the characters and the character designs themselves. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the very oval-shaped eyes that a lot of these characters have, but again, when they want to make things look gorgeous, they look absolutely gorgeous. There's a lot of attention to detail and a lot of the craftsmanship of the outfit that Jusetsu's wearing. It's definitely nailing the time period this is kind of set in, and it visually looks very pleasing. And yes, whenever it technically gets into her using magic, and which is technically not something that should be normal in the world itself, it's very beautifully portrayed. Kind of makes me think that the whole process of her taking down her hair ornament and infusing it with magic is probably going to be something that's going to be done on a regular basis. It's like her way of doing an investigation or using a spell to look into the key of an item. Characters so far are pretty fantastic. I think the Emperor himself obviously has a driving force. He has reclaimed his throne, but he also wants to do it justly. He doesn't want to fall into the terrible nature of the previous Empress. Jusetsu's really cute, very secluded character. It kind of gets this idea that the Raven Consort should be one that's always secluded, one that should not want anything. Maybe it's because of what they're able to do. They shouldn't desire things because then they can use that magic for wrong and then obviously be seen as a witch and be hunted down. But because of her isolated nature, you do see a little bit of sense in her that she's very reserved, very unwilling to kind of involve herself with people. But at the same time, he's slowly nipping away from her shell to kind of pull her into opening herself up more. And she's definitely cute when she gets in that position. And it extends with her conversation with the other consorts, really getting a sense that she is a lot different than a lot of these consorts. Even one of them, Juju, she was mentioning the idea that she talks very formal and not like the other consorts. So again, very so much into her isolation. I was kind of a little surprised to see how open she was the moment that she came out of the palace, even though she's always isolated, to be so willing to step forward and talk to people. You'd think that she'd be a little bit more hesitant or shy, but doesn't seem to be a problem for her. She's very confident in herself, I guess. But yeah, with all that said, I am really excited for this series. I think they played out the mystery element pretty well. This idea, this ghost, having this sort of restraint on their neck, getting into what exactly happened to them, piecing together all this gossip to really make an entire picture out of it, which again tells me that this writer really knows what they're doing. So it has me excited for the writing going forward. So I'm looking forward to it. Hope you guys enjoy this first impression of the series, Raven of the Inner Palace. If you did, make sure to hit that like button down below. Comment. Let me know what you thought of the series if you're going to be checking it out. Additionally, if you've not already, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you want to support this content more, we have a Patreon link, a tips link, and a super thanks button down below. I greatly appreciate everybody that does, and y'all take care.